Now, Shelley Finkel has come out and said that Deontay Wilder's target is the Usyk Joshua winner, but there's also been reports that Deontay Wilder might face Robert Helenius in October, possibly as like a tune-up fight. And then, let's say he wins that for argument's sake, he would go on to fight the winner of Joshua Usyk. Now, pertaining to Wilder Joshua, this was the fight that never happened. And I know there's also a lot of talk on, well, who ducked who. Some people think Wilder ducked Joshua, Joshua ducked Wilder. This party is scared, or maybe the other party is scared. Listen, I'm going to come out right and say this. Neither Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder are scared or were ever scared of each other. It just doesn't happen like that. They're not scared. These are people who have boxed several times. It's their career, it's their job. They're not afraid to go in the ring and fight another man. They might be nervous pre-fight. They might be wary, not worried or worrying, but wary of the opponent's strengths and the dangers the opponent presents, but they're not scared. I've just never really been into calling fighters scared and so on and so forth. I understand why people might say, oh, this guy's ducking, he might be outpricing himself. Maybe because the fighter doesn't believe they're ready for the fight, or the fighter's team might not think a fighter is ready for the fight, so they might outprice themselves or just duck a certain fighter. Yeah, that's possible, but in terms of saying a fighter is scared of another fighter in their weight class, I find it extremely hard to believe. I feel like only fanboys really come out and say that. I'm someone who is a fan of boxing. I like Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. I like the pair of them. You feel like both sides had their own belief about what they were worth, and the fight wasn't able to happen at the time. Now, some people say that Shelley Finkel and Team Wilder opted to go for Tyson Fury because Tyson Fury was an easier touch, or at least that's what they believed, but obviously that didn't turn out being true. But obviously that's what people say. They believe that because Tyson Fury came back from retirement, he wasn't in the best of shapes. He was fighting mediocre opposition prior to the first Wilder fight, that they were thinking to themselves, you know what, let's just put Wilder in there against Tyson Fury because this is someone who beat Klitschko. That would be a ridiculously good name on Deontay Wilder's resume if he were to beat a Tyson Fury. But unfortunately for Deontay Wilder, and Shelley Finkel and Deontay Wilder's team, it didn't quite work out for them. But now they seem ready to make the Anthony Joshua fight. Obviously, the best moment to have made the fight was when they were both undefeated, when they were knocking everyone out. Some people were saying that essentially they were invincible. People couldn't fathom the idea that Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua could lose to anyone else in the division. They thought that if Wilder or Joshua were to lose, it would be against each other and they couldn't take a loss from anyone else. But how wrong they were. Obviously, Ruiz was able to beat Joshua and Fury was able to beat Wilder a couple times, and also Usyk was able to beat Joshua. So it just goes to show that some people are very simplistic in their way of thinking. They don't really recognize that styles make fights. But what would you guys think of a Deontay Wilder Anthony Joshua fight? Let's say if that fight were to happen, let's say Joshua beats Usyk, who would you favor in that fight? Now, some people might say that Anthony Joshua is a bit gun shy and that favors Deontay Wilder. But I've also heard a couple times that Joshua said that if he were to fight Wilder, essentially he would put him on the back foot. And I think he actually even said this before Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder. I think Joshua said this a fair bit before Fury beat Wilder. He said that he would essentially try to take Wilder out in the early rounds, put him on the back foot and overwhelm him. The danger with Deontay Wilder is obviously moving backwards. If you're moving backwards and you don't have good head movement, your upper body is quite stiff, that's where it could be very dangerous for an Anthony Joshua. He would really need to avoid moving on the back foot, and he would really need to put Wilder on the back foot, because Wilder obviously isn't a back foot fighter. Wilder likes to come forward and hunt his opponent. He doesn't like to be hunted and slip off the ropes and counter punch and throw a variety of different punches. No, he wants to throw the right hand. He wants to set up the right hand. But in terms of his footwork going backwards, it can often be difficult for Deontay Wilder at times. And we don't know how much the Tyson Fury losses took out of Deontay Wilder. I mean, the third fight was an absolute war. Wilder gave such a great effort, but Tyson Fury was just slightly better on the night, and that's why he got the victory. But I think even Tyson Fury said there were like lumps on the back of his head and so on and so forth from the punishment he took from Deontay Wilder in that fight. But does Deontay Wilder have the same punch resistance? We don't know. We don't know how that impacted Deontay Wilder, specifically the third fight. He clearly had a lot in him after the second fight, but now after the third fight, another knockout loss, we just don't know what that would do to Deontay Wilder and how that could impact him. But we know that Deontay Wilder is an extremely intense person. He's even often talked about catching a body in the ring. So this is not someone who would go out very, very easily. Some people would come out and say, well, Deontay Wilder has a lot more heart than Anthony Joshua, and that if Anthony Joshua even had half of the heart of Deontay Wilder, that he probably could have done a lot better against Usyk, if not even beat him. But we'll never know, I guess. We'll have to wait and see the fight happen. But that is definitely a fight that still really does intrigue me. But if Usyk were to beat Joshua and Wilder were to fight Usyk, I mean, what do you guys think the outcome of that fight would be? Is Usyk a little bit too slick for Deontay Wilder? I mean, some people will say that Usyk wouldn't be getting hit, but Usyk's face was mashed up in the Anthony Joshua fight, and Anthony Joshua wasn't landing as much as concussive punches as he is accustomed to. He wasn't really sitting on the shots. He was just throwing them with speed, but not necessarily a lot of power. He was just kind of touching Usyk and then moving his hand back into a defensive position. So if Deontay Wilder lands a big right hand on Usyk, it could really, really hurt Alexander Usyk. Though he might telegraph his punches and Usyk might see them coming from a mile away and be able to slip the punches and press Wilder a bit. You know, you don't always have to try to box and move the entire fight. You can kind of switch it up. You know, we often seen Floyd Mayweather. He wasn't always going backwards. People always like to say that, oh, Mayweather's a runner. He was always moving backwards, but that's not actually true. If you look at the Canelo Alvarez-Mayweather fight, once Mayweather really settled into the fight, he was just walking down Canelo Alvarez, who was probably 15 to 20 pounds bigger than him. So Floyd Mayweather himself, the great Mayweather, he didn't just move on the back foot, try to box the entire fight. He would also press his opponent and put them on the back foot. Is that something an Alexander Usyk could do to a Deontay Wilder? Box him a bit and then be a bit more aggressive and put him on the back foot and use a little bit of the Tyson Fury template. Obviously, he wouldn't be able to replicate exactly what Fury done to Wilder because he's not as big as Fury. But he is more slicker than Fury in terms of his defense. But he isn't someone who is unhittable. His defense isn't as good as obviously, these are two different fighters in two different weight divisions, so it's obviously hard to compare with two different body types, but he isn't as slick as a Mayweather. His defense isn't as consistently good. He does get hit, is what I'm trying to say. Obviously, if you box, you're going to get hit. As if you swim, you're going to get wet, but I feel like he is a lot more hittable than people make it out to be. That's why I do feel like there are certain things Anthony Joshua can do in the match, in the rematch, to have success against Usyk that people might be overlooking. But it is what it is. Both fights would be a great fight. It's a shame that Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua didn't happen when they were both undefeated. But realistically, I actually don't really care. If that fight were to happen now, that would be an amazing fight. I wouldn't care if Joshua lost to Usyk and then he went in there against the Deontay Wilder. It doesn't really bother me. Two exciting heavyweights being in the ring is something to be happy about. Often people like to complain that big fights don't happen, but people are often overcritical when fighters lose. If you've seen when Joshua lost to Ruiz, people were saying that Joshua should retire. They were very emotional. They weren't thinking that, well, maybe Joshua just approached the fight in the wrong way, or maybe something was wrong with Anthony Joshua. They didn't consider the fact that Joshua was able to drop Ruiz on the inside, even though his arms are significantly longer and he's a much taller person than Andy Ruiz. So it just showed how good his inside ability was for someone of his height. To be able to even compete with Ruiz was very impressive. They didn't consider Ruiz's skill set prior to the AJ fight because they probably never really watched Ruiz. So they didn't have a good understanding of what Ruiz could do. And when the rematch happened, Joshua easily beat Andy Ruiz. Obviously, it's a different conversation with the Usyk fight because Usyk, you'd have to say, is better than Ruiz. And I do believe Usyk would be in much, much better shape than Ruiz was for the rematch. But you cannot completely count someone out, especially in this division. The heavyweight division is the glamour division, and it only takes one punch. So what do you guys think of Shelly Finkel coming out and saying that the winner of Joshua Usyk is a target for Deontay Wilder? Do you like a Deontay Wilder versus a Helenius as a tune-up? I mean, some people who are overly critical of Deontay Wilder are going to complain and cry and say, oh, Helenius, he's not an elite heavyweight. Some people would say, no, it is a good resume. It's a good name on his resume, but come on. Wilder deserves a tune-up fight. Someone who is beatable. He's been in several tough fights with Tyson Fury. If he can get in there with Helenius, we see what he's got. If he's still got it, if he does get the victory, then he could go in the ring with Anthony Joshua or an Usyk. I'm fine with him going in the ring with Helenius first. He does need a tune-up fight because he's been out the ring for what? Almost a year. I think the Fury fight was October 2021. So if he were to fight Helenius in October of this year, it would have been a year depending on what date the fight were to occur. So since he's been out the ring a long time, a tune-up is not a bad idea. Alright guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and peace.